by focusing on what kids are saying in a group chat. Grow up. I'm sorry. Focus on the real issues. Don't focus on what kids say in group chats.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ryan. Today, instead of continuing our series on Christian nationalism, which I will do, by the way, I think the next video in that series will be defining Christian nationalism, because someone brought up to me, the whole idea of that series is that we're going to look at the individual pillars that hold Christian nationalism up, the sort of foundation that it's built on, and we'll dismantle each pillar systematically. And then the whole thing will come crumbling down. So we addressed one pillar, which is Romans chapter 13 is one of the most common things that Christian nationalists revert to assert their own authority. And we dismantled that pillar in the first video. The next pillar that we'll tackle will be from the book of Jeremiah. We hear a lot of Christian nationalists argue that the book of Jeremiah reaffirms this idea that we ought to be Christians involved in government. That's completely false and taken out of context. It's an easy one to take down. That'll be the next pillar we dismantle. But someone brought up in the first video, hey, we should probably define what Christian nationalism is. So the next video I do in that series will probably be just to get a good baseline of what is Christian nationalism and why is it wrong? Like just a basic one-off, here's what it is and here's what the Bible says about it. And then we'll continue dismantling the pillars. But I wanted to take a little bit of a break from that today and focus on the news that came out this morning about the Young Republicans group text chats that got leaked. And this is extremely alarming for a number of different reasons, and I want to talk about why. Now, I will give credit where credit is due. There have been some Republicans who have denounced this chatter immediately. They saw it and they found it repulsive. They denounced it. And the people involved in that group chat were immediately called to resign or be fired, right? Like, get them out of here. We don't want them. So to those conservatives who had that same reaction, I applaud you. I think it's very important to give credit where credit is due, because I know that true conservative values don't line up with what came out of that chat. But what's alarming about this is that from the top down, the vice president, J.D. Vance, spoke about this, and he said that people need to grow up. And he wasn't talking about the people in the group text. He was talking about the people who were concerned about it. He said, this is nothing to be worried about. You need to grow up if you care about what kids are talking about in their group text chats. And he hand waved it and said, this is not a problem. The reason why that's very concerning is that the Young Republicans group is the formative environment where many Republican and conservative leaders in our government come out of. Okay, by my count, and I just stopped, but I counted at least 29 congressmen that came out of the Young Republicans program. These are people leading our country. So past and present congressmen, I counted at least 29 before I just stopped in my own research. I was like, holy cow, there's just so many. So what's worrisome about this is that this is the formative environment where these leaders are shaped, okay? Now, beyond that, J.D. Vance hand waves this and says, these people are just kids.
If you put something in a group chat, assume that some scumbag is going to leak it in an effort to try to cause you harm or cause your family harm. But the reality is that kids do stupid things, especially young boys.
Well, the Young Republicans range from 18 years old to 40 years old. And a lot of the people in question here are like 30 years old. I mean, they're JD's age. That's what's really concerning, is that we can't just hand wave this as being just kids doing kid stuff. I would like to also mention that as a teenager, I never made jokes like this. And I'll put some of the quotes on screen. Okay, well, what things were said in these group text chats? What kinds of things were said? So I will give you a graphic that will show you some of the individual quotes that were pulled out, some of the worst of the worst. I mean, we're talking about people praising Hitler. We're talking about people saying it's time to put our political rivals in gas chambers. I mean, we're talking abhorrent, disgusting, racist, vile things. Now, what's worrisome about this is, like I said, this is where the leaders are coming from. People who end up in authority positions come through this program. That's what's so worrisome about it. And it reaffirms what many of us suspected to be true, is that Racism is baked into the DNA of many of the current conservative leaders. Now, I can tell you definitively that growing up in a more conservative household, in a more conservative environment, this is not in line with what old school conservatives believe. And especially if you are a Christian voter who voted Republican, now you have to weigh this and say, oh my gosh, these are the people that end up leading the Republican Party. Because, for the record, you don't get to choose as a Republican voter. And also as a Democrat voter, I didn't get to choose either. But you don't get to choose who ends up on the ballot, do you? That choice is kind of made for you. You're kind of just voting along party lines usually. But you're not the one deciding who ends up on the ballot. So these are the people that are being chosen for you. And you're just affirming, saying, Republican, yes, I want that guy because he's Republican. Yes, I'm in. But now you get a peek behind the curtain and you see who these people actually are. Now, if you are a Christian voter, this should be really, really worrisome to you, because racism and Christianity simply cannot coexist. It's impossible. It is literally, and I hate ultimatums, but this is one that's kind of an obvious one. Usually I try to avoid ultimatums. This is one that there's just no negotiating, okay? You cannot both support racism and be a Christian. Those things are mutually exclusive. In fact, when Jesus says, the most important things are to love God and to love your neighbor, a guy asks, he says, a Jewish guy says, hey, okay, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus specifically gives an example in the form of a Samaritan of somebody who is ethnically and politically different than the guy that asked. Ethnically and politically different. He says, this is your opposite. He literally picks someone on purpose for his example who is opposite of the guy who asked. So, racism, Christianity, they are mutually exclusive. Jesus makes that abundantly clear. Now, obviously, I would have preferred if the vice president, J.D. Vance, had actually just said, hey, this is horrible stuff, and I am just as shocked as you guys are to hear it. But instead, he dismissed it. He said, this is just kids being kids. Not kids, 18 to 40 years old. Not just any people either. These are future leaders in the Republican Party. And by the way, the only reason that's not going to happen anymore is because they got caught. Not because they did it, but because they got caught doing it. How many more have just slipped through the cracks and ended up in positions of power? Like I said, 29 congressmen that I counted came through this program. I talked about this on social media. I have a Twitter account. And there was a really interesting guy that responded. He said, it pains me to admit these days, I'm just reading. He said, but I used to be a dues-paying young Republican member. So he admits that he's like, I used to be like, I was all in. And so much so that I was financially supporting these people. He goes on to say, these are definitely not kids. Many also work in D.C. as congressional staffers if they don't make it into a Congress position. He says, things have really changed. I remember being at a state GOP party on election night in 2016, and our statewide young Republican chair was quite upset about the top of the ticket, aka who's on top of the Republican ticket. Yeah. He says things have changed. Back then, basically no one in the young Republicans liked Trump, but then things changed and he felt compelled to leave. And this really does reaffirm what I said earlier, that I don't think that this was originally how people operated in conservative circles. I think that people were more concerned about things like low taxes, less government involvement in our lives. And now it's interesting because we have this dynamic shift, this massive shift, where now the Republicans are the ones that are locking out Congress when they are supposed to be passing legislation that helps reduce things like our insurance premiums. The common man is paying more because Republicans are in power. That's a shift. They wanted less government involvement in people's lives, and now we have the federal government invading cities, specifically ones that are that tend to vote opposite of the current administration. Donald Trump is sending soldiers into Democrat cities. And the reports of what's happening there, by the way, by also local conservative news outlets. It's not top down. You're never going to see it on Fox News, never going to see it on Newsmax, but local conservative reporting says, hey, this is really bad. They're like, this is not good, guys. This is not good. They're racially profiling people who are legal citizens, throwing them to the ground, kidnapping them. They are shoving them into vehicles. They're not showing themselves as being agents. They're in plain clothes, jeans and a t-shirt. When a guy in jeans and a t-shirt comes up to you with a gun and forces you to the ground, you think you're being mugged. And then they say, well, he resisted arrest. It's like, well, how was I supposed to know I was being arrested? Just a dude in jeans and a t-shirt comes up with a gun and throws me to the ground. Do you want me to just immediately comply? That's not how it works. But they're baiting you into a reaction. And the local reporters are saying, guys, this is really, really bad. Like, our community is being torn apart by people who are just coming in, and the only qualification for why they would detain you is the color of your skin. This is not the original Republican Party. This would make my grandparents sick to their stomachs. They were very conservative people, but I grew up in a family of missionaries, people who spent a lot of time outside of the States with people in other cultures of different ethnicities, and they see the value in their fellow human being. This would make them sick, even though they are conservatives. So I really just wanted to bring this to the forefront of the conversation and say, hey, by the way, I know that the vice president is trying to sweep this under the rug and say this is not a big deal. It is a big deal. Key points to remember. These guys were on track to be leaders in our government. They were not children. They were not just kids or teenagers, talking 18 to 40-year-olds. 18 to 40-year-olds, adults, many of whom end up in positions of influence and power within the Republican Party. We cannot sweep this under the rug, and if you are a true conservative, this should alarm you. And the knee-jerk reaction, and I'm sure there's already, before I even get to this point in the video, there are people putting comments like, but what about this Democrat that said this? Listen, that's called whataboutism. It is not a valid argument. Pointing out the flaws in one person does not justify the flaws in this person. They're both bad. True character is being able to say, that's bad and that's bad. Even if this is your guy and that's not your guy, both of them, bad. And when we've seen racism in the Democrats, I think it's bad. All right. I want to be clear about this. I'm not a registered Democrat. I am a Christian. My citizenship is in a different kingdom. And the way that I vote depends on how I value what I read in this book. All right. So if the Democrats are going against the values in here, then I'm upset. If the Republicans are going against the values in here, then I'm upset. That's not how, I don't just vote on party lines. I'm not just affiliated with, okay, these guys are the good guys and these guys are the bad guys all the time, right? True character is being able to find the faults in all of them and being big enough to admit it. Whataboutism does not hold water, ever. Sorry. Just doesn't. But anyways, I'd love to know what you guys think about these messages that were leaked, this group chat, and what do you think the implications are about people like this being the ones on the fast track into leadership positions within the government? Does that concern you? Does it not concern you? What concerns you the most right now with what you're seeing from the people currently in power? Thanks so much for watching the video today. Looking forward to diving into what is Christian nationalism and then diving into the book of Jeremiah as well. That should be a really fun discussion. So with that, I say be warm and well-fed, my friends, and I hope to catch you in the next video. Bye-bye.